In last year's playoffs, it was the Edmonton Oilers defense that gave them trouble. This year, the defense has been a pleasant surprise. What's gone into the improvement, and how much more can the Oilers realistically expect from their defensive group on part two of our first half of the season recap?
You are Locked On Oilers, your daily podcast on the Edmonton Oilers, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to this Tuesday edition of Locked On Oilers. I am your host, Nick Sararis. I want to thank everyone who's making Locked On Oilers their first listen of the day. Locked On Oilers, a part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's show is brought to you by FanDuel, where right now new customers can get $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. On today's show, all things Edmonton Oilers defense, the philosophy, the underlying results, what to expect going forward, a little bit more on John Klingberg, and let's start with the big picture. Coming into this season, the Edmonton Oilers defense was their big question mark. You would look at this group on paper, and without John Klingberg, who is more name recognition than performance, at least so far, you would have been right to say, I don't know about this group. It would have been very realistic for guys to look at these six defensemen, especially before they had signed Klingberg, and say, I don't know. That doesn't look like a group who's capable of winning a Stanley Cup. You know, we typically look at Stanley Cup winners and their defenses in particular. They usually skew older. They usually have a lot of playoff and regular season experience, frankly. And this group was coming in with Troy Stecher and Ty Emberson, expected to play roles they hadn't really ever played before on a Stanley Cup contender. And it would have been fair to look at those guys and say, well, Emberson's young, only 30 career NHL games before this season. If I remember correctly, he was 27 on last year's Sharks team. So he's, even though, his age, you would expect a little bit more experience, but you would say, okay, he's their upside play. They think they see something there. Okay. Troy Stecher, nice guy. The Oilers had him last year. He played 40-ish games across a couple seasons, been injured, hasn't ever really consistently been a top six NHL defenseman on a good team. And most of the time, you are going to see contenders have an abundance of experience on that back end if you are going to go all the way. You look at that Florida group last year with Dmitry Kulikov, over 1,000 career NHL games, Aaron Ekblad, 10 years in the NHL already, which is crazy to me because I was in high school when Aaron Ekblad was drafted. You think about Brandon Montour, who multiple stints on bad teams up in Buffalo, went down to Florida, kind of re-injected some life into his career. Gus Forsling, plenty of NHL experience. Nico Mikkola, 6-7 seasons NHL experience. Not a ton, but that group had a lot. And this Oilers group on paper, you were losing the experience of Cody Ceci. And as maligned a player as Cody Ceci was, NHL coaches really do value experience, and they use that in their considerations for assignments. We're going to talk about guys' power play and penalty kill assignments. And part of that is if another coach has trusted you to do that, a team is going to be more inclined to let you give it a shot as opposed to trying someone new. And losing Philip Broberg, somebody who had done some of the legwork on their development, it was frustrating conceptually to have punted those years of development you put into Broberg. And with the way the salary cap's going, you probably could make a little bit more of an argument they probably should have matched on Philip Broberg. But all things considered, when you look at the defensive results, and we'll talk about those in depth in the second segment, it is hard not to feel like this group is doing its job and then some. I have spent a lot of time this season, and especially the first 2 months, if you go back and watch a random episode from October or November, you'll hear me say, yeah, I don't think the defense is that good, but unless the Oilers start scoring more, it doesn't really matter, because this team fundamentally is built on its offense. They're paying one defenseman in Darnell Nurse a lot of money, and he's their third best defenseman. Brett Kulak doesn't make a lot of money, Emerson doesn't make a lot of money. Stetcher doesn't make a lot of money. And now John Klingberg, he does not make a ton of money. You are paying one guy serious money. Ekholm's got a decently sized contract, but he's well worth what he's getting paid. What you choose to spend your money on tells people, tells your fan base, tells your content creators what you think is important. And the Oilers have committed a ton of money to their forwards. And when you have two guys who are making in excess of $10 million, there aren't a lot of teams that have two forwards over $10 million. You do have to get creative in some other places and see where you can create aggregate performance. You know, to quote Moneyball, we're not replacing Jason Giambi. We just need to replace his production. We can recreate him in the aggregate. We can add up a few guys who aren't as individually good as player X, but we can still get good results. And the Oilers defense is fundamentally predicated on transition and control. If you go and look at the underlying numbers, if you look at the transition data, the Oilers are pretty good at carrying the puck out of their own zone, whether that's a defenseman skating it out themselves. You know, Nurse likes to do that. He's pretty mobile for his size, or passing it out. You know, the Oilers love that one pass and letting McDavid build up some speed, or Janmark or Connor Brown down the wings. They want to create those opportunities for guys to use their foot speed to kind of take the pressure off of their defense. And the only real time this defensive group, I should say, gets in trouble is when they get pinned in their own zone. And if you forecheck the Oilers hard, you can put heat on them. And that's the consensus. That's how you stop a transition offense in the NHL. You get the puck in deep and you make them go the length of the ice every single time. Because even if they keep getting clean puck recoveries and going back, they still got to do the work of going back to get it, skating back the other way. And that, in effect, slows the game down. If you dump and chase the puck in over and over and over again, and neither team can really maintain sustained possession in an offensive zone, you're bringing the total number of shots or scoring chances in a game down, which plays into a team that isn't going to be able to go back and forth, up and down in transition the way the Oilers want to. That's how you beat a team like Edmonton. You make them play good defense and you force them to hold up structurally. And a team like Florida was uniquely situated to exploit that because their forecheckers are also really good players. And this year, the Oilers defense has done a really, really, really good job of limiting quality, of limiting volume of chances against, and that's tied to the offense. You know, the Oilers have some of the best possession metrics in the entire sport. We talked about that on yesterday's show where we talked about the offense. But of course, this is hockey. Offense and defense are fundamentally intertwined. You know, we talked a little bit about the defenseman contributions to offense yesterday, and we're going to talk in the third segment of this show about forward contribution to defense, because that does matter. And it's really one of the ways to make a team over the top better, you know, to be the cherry on top, if you will. If you have forwards who are committed to sound fundamental defense, who back check hard, that's a really core tenet of a successful team. We're going to take our first break of today's show. When we come back, we're going to dive into the underlying numbers and explain a little bit more about why the Oilers offense and defense are so intertwined, why the defense has been so good this year, and a whole lot more. So be sure to stick around to this edition of Locked On Oilers, where we've got your team covered every day. Did you just realize your business needed to hire someone yesterday? How can you find amazing candidates fast? Easy. Just use Indeed. When it comes to hiring, Indeed is all you need. Stop struggling to get your job post seen on other sites. Indeed Sponsored Job Credit puts your post at the top of the page to help you reach the right candidates faster. We've all been in that spot where we need the right hire like yesterday. The pressure's on, and every day without the right person is setting our team back. That's exactly where Indeed Sponsored Jobs come in handy. They make sure your post is seen by the right candidates right now. Now, you can speed up your hiring process with a $75 sponsored job credit. Just go to Indeed.com/lockedon right now and support our show by saying you heard about Indeed on this podcast. Terms and conditions apply. Hiring, Indeed is all you need. Thank you to everyone who is hanging out on this Tuesday edition of Locked On Oilers as we are breaking down the Oilers' defensive renaissance. And what makes the Oilers group effective, and something I should have addressed in the first segment. When you have a defensive pair that is as good as Ekholm and Bouchard are, both in terms of traits, how well their traits match up, and the underlying output that backstops all of that, it really enables you as a coach to build out the rest of your defense a little more tactically in terms of how you use them. Ekholm and Bouchard, they play in opposite units. Ekholm, penalty killer. Bouchard, power play guy. Yes, Ekholm does occasionally get out there on the second power play or in games where Bouchard hasn't been available. Ekholm has been the point man. But when you have the opportunity to play your best defensive pair in some shape or form for almost 40% of the game, that makes managing the other 60% easier. And it's a little bit less than that. Bouchard plays like 38%. Ekholm plays about 36% of the game. But when you have that opportunity to control that much of the game, because those two often are deployed with McDavid as well, you are almost assuredly going to win those 30 to 35 minutes of the game outright decisively. And that's not factoring in the increased offensive implications that are associated with power play time of getting Bouchard out there with McDavid. But that in of itself has allowed the Oilers to kind of work their way through what this group needs to look like. Because when the season started, Darnell Nurse wasn't a participant in training camp, played one preseason game, if I recall correctly, then got dropped in the lineup on opening night. And it took him a good month to look right at NHL speed. And I've talked about it numerous times this season and highlighting how well he's played since about the middle to end of November. He needed that first month to get himself up to speed. Going from the preseason to the regular season just normally is a tall ask. You think about that in terms of somebody who didn't get training camp and didn't really get to work their way up to game shape. It's a really daunting task. And those underlying results, especially on the penalty kill, that first month were outright disastrous. I've said it more than once, but after the first 10 games, they had conceded a power play goal against every third penalty kill. That is unfathomably bad. When you are conceding a power play goal against 25, 30% of the time, your penalty kill is actively losing you games. And since then, their kill has been really good, but macro level, big picture. The single most important thing to me when we're talking about defense is quality control. Can you limit the amount of dangerous scoring chances the other team creates? Because fundamentally, abstractly, if you are allowing the other team to shoot from, the perimeter, the points, bad angles, and you are limiting the quality of chance, you are doing the most you can do defensively. Hockey is different than, say, basketball or football or even baseball, where some of your defense is a bit more active and preventative. And in hockey, fundamentally, the other team's going to get the puck at points. You are going to have to play defense, and you have to play with what's in front of you. You have to adapt to what the other guys are doing. You have to defend within the tenets of your system, but you have to be able to react to what's in front of you. And as we've talked about a lot on Locked On Oilers, you guys know the goal of a good offense is to put pressure on the defense and force the defenders to make decisions of, do I need to go here? Do I need to go there? If this player has the puck and they move it over here, what does that do to my assignment? What does that do to my responsibility? And when you're playing a team that is eager to settle for low quality chances, you are putting yourself in a position to be successful. Because if you can limit the quality of offense that your opponent is generating, you are fundamentally putting yourself in a position to control the game, where they are going to get looks. Like I said, hockey, every team is going to get at least one good look a game. Most teams are going to get a handful of good looks per game. That's just the nature of hockey. the free-flowedness, the open-endedness. Everybody's going to get a handful of good looks. If you go and look on Natural Stat Trick and you sort by high danger chances per 60 minutes of 5-on-5 ice time, every team plays 40 to 45 minutes of 5-on-5 per game, barring an extremely weird game. And in those 40 minutes, you're going to get about 2/3 of those averages. And every team gets a few. Some are only generating, 1 or 2 per period. But the Oilers concede the lowest rate of high danger chances against in the entire NHL. That is something that matters. Now, we talked about this a little bit on yesterday's show on the inverse of, are the Oilers, if they generate a ton of offense, does that make up for their lack of finishing talent? The other end of this is, well, if the Oilers have the puck a ton and the other team doesn't have nearly as much possession, does that incentivize the other team to really be picky and choosy in the offensive zone, that they know, hey, we're only getting, 30 scoring chances a game. We should probably be a little more conservative. We should try and string together several passes to try and get one really good, dangerous look. Because I do think on some level, the Oilers' offensive creation, their ability to control the flow of play, I think that definitely helps their defense. You're not going to get me saying anything to the contrary. But I do think it puts a bit of a spotlight on the Oilers' defense when they do make mistakes, because they're not asked to do a lot. So it's kind of a double-edged sword in that respect, because yes, on the numbers basis, they don't give up a lot, whether we're talking about total or high danger. But because they don't play a lot of defense, it does feel like an outsized portion of the chances they give up from time to time are of the high danger variety, because there are fewer total scoring chances. So I understand why that might play some tricks on you in your mind, why those two ideas might seem incongruous. And Evan Bouchard is a great example. Somebody who is undoubtedly a very, very talented hockey player. Somebody I would venture to say is amongst the top 15 to 10 at his position. And there are a lot of people out there who think Evan Bouchard is actively a bad player because of the defensive mistakes he makes, because he doesn't have to play a lot of defense because he's so good at offense. It's all interconnected, and you have to accept some drawbacks in your defense to create offense at a fundamental level. You're always going to have to give to get when we're talking about a finite number of chances within a given game. So I do think it's important to highlight how interconnected the various phases of the game are and how much it explains some of the phenomena people experience while they're watching the Oilers. We're going to take one more break on today's show. When we come back, we're going to tackle the big picture, the penalty kill, where there might be opportunities for improvement. We'll talk a little more in depth about John Klingberg, a whole lot more. So be sure to stick around to this edition of Locked On Oilers. We've got your team covered every day. When the game tips off, NBA action is just getting started, and there's no better place to get in on it than FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. With FanDuel, you can place live bets throughout the game, so even if you miss the opening tip-off or want to bet on a fourth quarter comeback, you can stay in the action. If you're looking for a bigger payout, you can even combine your live bets in a same-game parlay. I love using FanDuel's live betting feature because it keeps every moment of the game exciting. When me and my friends are together watching a game, we love to hit a squad ride to try and mount a comeback, or picking a player to hit a big three. Never feel like I've missed a chance when I have FanDuel. Plus, the app is easy to use, and when you win, you get paid instantly. Right now, new customers can get $150 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. It's FanDuel.com for your shot at $150 in bonus bets. Get every moment more with FanDuel, the official sports betting partner, the NBA. Thank you to everyone who is hanging out on this Tuesday edition of Locked On Oilers in our first half of the regular season recap. Yesterday's show was offense. Tomorrow's show will be goaltending. Today's defense. We'll do a Four Nations face-off special. We'll talk coaching and general manager. We have a guest lined up. So it's a little bit of variety, a little bit of everything, trying to analyze the first 55 games of the regular season, what they mean going forward, and just putting everything that's happened so far into context so you can mentally prepare yourself for this sprint to the finish. Because for as much as the NHL regular season is a marathon, because 82 games over 5.5, 6 months does feel like a long time, it's important to recognize that right now we're sitting here second week of February. We're less than a month away from the NHL trade deadline on March 7th. We are 2 months away from the NHL playoffs. We're 4 months away from when the Stanley Cup's going to be awarded. There is going to be a ramp up, and we saw a little bit of that already. You know, Mikko Rantanen and JT Miller both getting traded ahead of the Four Nations face-off, kind of getting the ball rolling on teams looking around at each other saying, well, if they're making that move, what can we do? How aggressive do we need to be? And coming into the year, I would have told you the Oilers' biggest need was another defenseman. I think, frankly, they need another defenseman. And I want to be fair to John Klingberg, who will start this segment talking about. I think John Klingberg is a good idea if you're the Oilers. All he costs is money. Money is a lot easier to take care of than burning a draft pick or a prospect to go get a defenseman. You can manage it a little bit less expectations-wise because you won't be worried about the sunk cost fallacy of, oh, well, we gave up this and this for this guy, and he's not playing well. Should we keep playing him? Well, we burn those assets, so we should play him. No. All we're talking about is money here. And I think Klingberg is interesting in the sense that this is a player who has reassembled himself through major corrective surgery. A double hip resurfacing is not something there is a significant track record of in the NHL. Less than 10 guys have ever had this procedure. Few guys have had varying degrees of success in returning, like Patrick Kane, who had a good year last year and has definitely shown signs of aging this year. Nick Backstrom has yet to really mount a comeback and is more likely than not done playing at the NHL level. So it's undetermined. But giving Klingberg, 5 weeks to audition to be a top 4 defenseman and slide everyone down one spot, it's not a bad idea. Fundamentally, if we're talking about idea, process, execution, everything about this makes sense. You get him in here early. You give him 5-6 weeks to see how well he fits, if he feels okay, if he plays well. Then, based on that, you can correct or change your course of action you are intending on as far as the trade deadline. I spent a lot of October, November, December, and January, frankly, thinking they need one more guy. They need to push everyone down one spot in their lineup, because if they can get Nurse a partner they feel good about, and they can play Emberson with Brett Kulak and Troy Stecher goes to the 7th defenseman spot, that's a group I feel confident in. And I have my reservations about Emberson, who just has never played in an NHL playoff game, but I think he is showing he's getting better as the season's gone along. I think he's gotten more comfortable as the season's gone along, and he's found a role. He is competent enough to play. I think Kulak has done a nice job moonlighting with him, playing with Darnell Nurse. I think building the defense out from that first pair down gives you flexibility. You can get away with only playing Troy Stecher 13, 14 minutes a night and bumping Brett Kulak up a few and bumping Ekholm and Bouchard up a few. And Darnell Nurse, who since about mid-November has been actively good. Then he's been a lot less volatile and concerning than he was in the playoffs last year. All of that is really encouraging. But that said, I still feel like this group should probably add another guy. If it were up to me, I would probably be looking at someone to push Emberson out. And look, I know they took a swing on Emberson. They feel good about him. Frankly, I feel good about him. I am just very worried about Klingberg, Emberson behind Bouchard on that right side come playoff time. And the reality is, you only have so many lineup spots. And the fact that they went out and gave Klingberg the contract they did does change their calculus. They can only spend so much money. They do have to account for the variability of a playoff run where you're going to probably need to play 8 or 9 defensemen to get to a Stanley Cup final just because of the wear and tear that accumulates. Defensemen take a lot of punishment going back to get those retrievals, getting hit, getting pressured. It does accumulate. Guys do get dinged up, and it's important. You have options to pull into you feel okay about. You don't want to have to play 7 defensemen where one guy gets 8 minutes, the 6th guy gets 11:30, and then the top 5 guys all get like 17 minutes plus. It's too taxing. It's very difficult for a team to be effective when they go with 7D. And look, I know that gets Connor McDavid a couple more shifts because you're going with 11 forwards, but I would rather have 6 defensemen I feel good about than having to do the 7th guy and dropping a forward and just increasing the decision-making and the variability within the group at large. But don't be confused. The Oilers defense has been really, really solid this year. I would not say it's elite. I would not say I am supremely confident in it, but the results, the underlying numbers, they show a proof of concept that the Oilers can control play with their offense, minimize the responsibility of their defense, and marry that to strong special teams and above average goaltending. And you've got one of the 5-10 best teams in the entire NHL. Now for the Oilers, it's a matter of how good can John Klingberg be? Do we think John Klingberg can play second pair minutes on a playoff team, play 17, 18 minutes a night with Nurse, getting difficult matchups, not getting McDavid with them as far as their deployment? That's what the next handful of weeks are going to be about. And I'm very curious to see what happens. John Klingberg has only played 5 games. That is not a huge sample to work off of as far as how confident I feel. I think he has earned the right to keep trying this out. I think based on the fact that the Oilers gave him a free agent contract that was probably a little bit more than a prove-it deal, tells you they think there's something they can work with there. And we'll see. That's one of the beauties of the in-season signing and the audition process, is getting to see how it shakes out, because the Oilers, they might be confident. Doesn't mean they know it's going to work out. And that's one of the beauties. We'll get to see what happens. But that will do it for today's edition of Locked On Oilers. If you could be so kind, please subscribe to the show wherever you get your podcasts. If you happen to be listening on Apple or Spotify, please leave the show a 5-star review. If you're watching over on YouTube, hit the subscribe button, hit the alarm bell, get a notification whenever new content goes live over there. New platform is coming soon. I'll tell you guys a little bit more about that when I have a few more details. I will talk to you guys tomorrow. We will start with goaltending, smidge of 4 Nations, and then we'll do a full 4 Nations preview episode on Thursday. I know Canada plays on Wednesday, but I want to do offense, defense, goaltending in order for continuity purposes so they're easier for people to find. I will talk to you guys tomorrow. Until then, let's go Oilers.